And I'd also like to say that because this is Zoom land that we are existing in tonight, we are zooming out onto the lands of many different Aboriginal people. And I'd like to pay my respects to the elders of the lands on which you are gathering tonight as well. This is Aboriginal land, always was and always will be, and sovereignty was never ceded. On that note, one little bit more housekeeping. If you're in the room tonight, if you can turn your phones to silent so that they don't go off in the middle of the event, that'd be great. If you're a tweeter or a Facebooker or an Instagrammer here or at home, feel free to indulge. I'll be tweeting at AvidReader40101 tonight. And also, if you are in the Zoom audience, you will be able to ask questions tonight. You just need to put them into the chat bar, and Emma Kate will text them to me, and I'll be able to ask them, as well as the people in the audience who will be able to just put their hands up like we used to. So we can have two forms of questions tonight. And the chat bar, if you don't know where it is, you will find it now, because Emma Kate is just about to send the link to the book, and that's where you can buy the book tonight. If you do want a personally signed copy of the book tonight, and if you want it signed to you, we just need to take payment before we do that from the Zoom audience. So you can email us your phone number, and we will phone you as soon as the event's over and get the personal dedication and get the payment for that tonight. And so you can have a personally signed copy too. You don't miss out after all. Great. So I think that's all the little bits and pieces of housekeeping that I needed to do tonight. So with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to the wonderful Madonna Duffy, who is the UQP Publishing Director. And this is her first address to public in many, many months. So please welcome Madonna.
Thank you, Chrissy. I'm just aligning. Oh, now I can't see myself. Yes, I can. Hello, everyone in Zoom land, and hello, everyone here in person at Avid Reader. It's incredibly exciting to be here. And thank you all for coming out on a rainy Monday night, because we know what a few drops of rain in Brisbane means. And that means that most people don't go out. So you are the brave, you are the intrepid tonight by coming out to be here. So thank you. I'd like to also begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the unceded land that I'm speaking from tonight, the Turrbal and the Yagara people, and to pay my respects to all of their elders, past and present. I'm beyond excited to be able to participate tonight, not just because it's my first in-person launch event for over a year. I think Chrissy and I were just reflecting on the last launch event we did in person in March here last year. I've spoken at launches on Zoom, but it's just really delightful to be here. And it was early last year, actually, that we were starting to work with Kailas Roberts on Mind Your Brain. So it's incredible what has happened in this past 12 months. A huge thank you to Avid Reader, to Chrissy Neen, to Emma Kate, to all the staff for hosting tonight, but also particularly for their extraordinary efforts in the past year to keep writers and readers connected. We are so very happy to see you all again too, so thank you. And can I just have a little round of applause for Avid Reader? I just wanted to say a few words before we get to hear Stefan Hajkowicz and Dr Kailas Roberts talk about his new book, Mind Your Brain. When Kailas first contacted me about his manuscript, I started doing some market research about available titles on the subject of dementia. And I found that many of the books were authored by American doctors, or were memoirs by people with dementia or by their loved ones. It struck me that there were no Australian authored books by a clinical practitioner that offered accessible and practical advice about dementia, how to live with it and how to manage it. Kailas explained when we met that there was a lot of misunderstanding about the condition, and by the time many people came to see him and be assessed, it was already well advanced. As a medical practitioner, it concerned him that more people should know about the advantages of early diagnosis and also what could be done to ease the journey after diagnosis. So Kailas decided to write the book that he felt didn't exist in the Australian market. In doing so, he wanted to assist anyone who has dementia in their family and who was also looking for evidence-based guidance on how to maintain a healthy brain. The result of him combining his extensive clinical experience and his ability to communicate clearly for non-medical people like most of us in the room and on Zoom tonight is Mind Your Brain. It was also important for us to offer a book to Australian readers that included up-to-date advice and resources that apply to our aged care sector and end-of-life legislation. For many medical people who may be here in the audience tonight or watching on Zoom, we know that you will be familiar with a lot of what is in this book, but we really hope that you will recommend it to those who need it. And there will be many who need it. I'm very much of the generation that is dealing with aging parents and looking for information and expert advice on the challenges ahead, but also thinking about my own brain health and how to plan for good health as I age. It is my hope that Dr. Kailas Roberts' Mind Your Brain will bring you comfort in knowledge. This is a big, important topic, one that will affect nearly all of us as dementia numbers triple in the next 30 years. I hope you find tonight's conversation not just interesting and educational, but also empowering. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Madonna. I think that we all could do with reading this book early rather than later in our journey. It is my absolute pleasure tonight to introduce you to Stefan Hajkowicz, who is actually going to introduce Kailas to you. So I'll introduce Stefan first. Stefan, we were very lucky to have him here reasonably recently, possibly 2015, to launch his own book, Global Megatrends, the treatise on the future of the world. Over the past 20 years, Stefan has been thinking about people planning for an uncertain future. With training in economics, geography, and decision theory, Stefan is one of the CSIRO's leading thinkers about trends, shocks, and scenarios in the coming decades. Stefan now works as a principal scientist at the CSIRO in Brisbane and is in demand worldwide as a speaker, strategist, and consultant. So we are very, very lucky to have him here today. So I will introduce Stefan and he will introduce Kailas.
Thank you. Fantastic. Thank you very much. And I've been working in my home office and have completely forgotten how to behave in public. So it's been about a year. This is my first time now. But a pleasure to be here and to introduce Kailas Roberts. Dr. Kailas Roberts is a consultant psychiatrist and psychogeriatrician with over 10 years experience in the field of old age psychiatry. He runs a busy private practice caring for people with cognitive difficulties and advises on the management of behavioural and psychological difficulties that often accompany dementia. He lives in Brisbane and this is his first book. We think there's a bit of a story there, but this is his first book. And he's also very fast at running, which makes me feel inadequate sometimes on Mount Cleather. But please come up, Kai, and grab your seat and we can begin. So Kailas, it is indeed a very well-written and well-researched book, practical and useful for people confronting this themselves or with a relative. I think as your publisher said, you get the feeling you're in safe hands because you've referenced everything very carefully. But I want to flip to my very favourite part of the book. It's like, I want to jump into it here because it says here on page 18, clearly by a professional, that drinking red wine in moderation is good. And I really like that part of the book. Can you confirm it?
Yes, I'm glad you got to the most important part of the book, Stefan, so early. Yeah, that's, I mean, I think it's good news and bad news when it comes to alcohol. It's bad news in that we don't really know the evidence, but it's good news in that you can probably drink a bit and not worry too much about feeling guilty you're doing the wrong thing at this stage. But essentially, excessive drinking over a long period of time is not good for your brain. Moderate drinking, a glass of wine now and again, we don't have the evidence to suggest that that's a real problem as long as you're otherwise healthy.
Right.
But you just, don't overdo it.
Okay, because you do kind of let the wind out of the sails in chapter 9 with frontal temporal alcohol-related subcortical dementia.
Yeah, so that's the outcome of excessive chronic consumption. It's not recommended.
Yeah. But the other bits of the Mediterranean diet sound good. I'm not sure a bit about kale as well. If you could just remove it, then.
Yeah, everybody hates kale,
Yeah,
don't they? But
so-
I think there are other sources of antioxidants if you really hate kale. But yeah, it's a good thing to have in your system.
So look, I want to start with the big question, which, I know more now having read the book, but what is dementia, Kai? Can you tell us?
Sure, and this is one of the questions that I get asked a lot, and in fact, people come to me initially really perhaps a little bit confused, saying, "Isn't Alzheimer's disease and dementia aren't they the same thing?" And I think that is a misconception, and it's good to try to clear that up. So dementia is really, a clinical syndrome which is associated with a change in some cognitive or thinking skill that impairs day-to-day function. So those are the sort of three things. And it's probably good to pick that apart a little bit. So the change is important because if you've always been appalling at remembering names, like me, then if that's your only problem as you get older, then that's not really indicative of a particular issue. So it has to be a change from a previous level of functioning. The impairment of daily function is also important as well, because if you're essentially doing what you can normally do day to day, despite a few cognitive issues, then again, we wouldn't necessarily think of dementia being likely to be occurring at that particular point in time. And the other thing to point out, I think, which is important, is that when we talk about cognitive skills, primarily people think of memory. If you've got memory loss, that's dementia. And that's a very important part of some forms of dementia. And certainly Alzheimer's disease classically presents with memory loss initially, but there can be other cognitive problems that develop before the memory problems are in association with it. So that might be things like language skills may deteriorate, visuospatial skills may deteriorate, even things like in social cognition. So that's our ability to make social judgments.
Never had it. What's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia?
Okay, so dementia is an umbrella term.
Yep.
So being told you have dementia isn't a diagnosis in itself, it's just a description. And under that umbrella, there are a number of different causes, and Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause.
Yes.
But there are a number of others. So there's vascular disease, Lewy body dementia, alcohol-related dementia, you named a few.
Right. So why write this book then? Why is it important for you to write the book?
Well, I think Madonna did a great job of summing it up, really. I've been working for a long time with people with memory problems, sometimes dementia, sometimes not. And there was just a lot of confusion. And I think people would often come to me later down the track, and they've been through quite a number of years of anguish and inaction, and they've sort of ended in a place which has been really quite difficult for them. And if they come to see me earlier, we may have been able to put lots of things in place to help them, whether that's strategies. There are certain medications that in some cases actually can help with memory loss, and they're much better off being put in place earlier rather than later. Sometimes it's about having an early warning so that you can plan for the future. So making sure you're doing things like you're enjoying power of attorney, advanced care directive, all that good stuff. And also just knowing what's going on can be really helpful for people as well.
So I'm really interested in the prevention question. I'll be turning 48 this year. What's the probability that I, as an average Australian, would get dementia?
So when we talk about Alzheimer's disease, the most common cause, the stats suggest somewhere between sort of maybe 2 to 4% in your mid to late 60s.
Yes.
And then beyond that, probably doubles every 5 years approximately.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So very widespread.
Very widespread. And so by the time you reach 85 or 90, it's closer to sort of 30 to 50%. But there is some suggestion that with some health strategies that have been put into place, that when you look at a similar cohort now to years ago, the actual incidence of dementia has dropped a little bit. So we do know that we can change the incidence of dementia at a society level by putting healthy interventions into place.
Yeah. So I can tick the red wine in moderation thing as
Yep.
one of the strategies. Is what are the other things I should be doing? And is now really the time I make a difference to
Yeah.
my future?
Yes, definitely now, Stefan,
Yes.
48.
Okay. Thank you.
Maybe you
I say
missed the
that too
boat.
many times.
Just kidding.
True.
You could
Only a
definitely.
year behind me, mate. I mean,
True. Yeah, so I think definitely midlife is important. I think that people would say earlier is better, certainly.
Yes.
Even in your 30s, I think is good. And actually some of the pathological processes that sort of underpin Alzheimer's start to occur in your 30s, in your 40s, and so the interventions are really best put in place very early on. I mean,
It's a gradual phenomenon, isn't it? This doesn't just, we don't wake up one morning with dementia.
no, yeah. Generally speaking, I mean, there are occasional exceptions to that. You can have a big stroke and that can cause a dementia-type syndrome. But as a general rule, it's sort of more of a gradual thing. And that's actually quite important to note, because if you have a more of a sudden change in symptoms, it's often suggestive of something else going on, such as some medical problem or medication effect or so.
Fantastic. So you run through a lot of the things that we can do, and we talked about diet. Just want you to comment also on gut health and fiber. It's associated with so many things that are good for us. But your research is showing that it's quite relevant for dementia prevention as well.
Yeah, not my research.
But steal an idea off one person and it's plagiarism. Steal an idea off lots of people and it's research. So you've done research.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, look, I'm a big fan of things like fiber, and I think that the microbiome is something that's increasingly coming into focus as I suppose, an influencing factor in all sorts of chronic diseases, including dementia. So that for those that don't know about the microbiome, it really is just a descriptive word that talks about the diversity of gut bacteria all the way from the mouth through to the other end. And so the diet that you have can fundamentally influence that, which can then influence inflammation chronically, which can then influence your risk of Alzheimer's disease. So the right diet is critical.
Absolutely. And fiber. So I think.
And fiber, yeah. So coming back to your fiber question, yeah. So fiber is particularly good. It lowers cholesterol. It feeds the good gut bacteria, and it also, through a mechanism with the gut bacteria, produces certain chemicals which are particularly healthy for the brain. So,
yes, and I read your teenage children behave better if either you have fiber or they have fiber. Anyway, a lot of Australians do not get enough fiber, and that's probably core take home from just about anything we talk about.
Yeah.
Is eat more fiber.
The other interesting thing, actually, while
Yes.
I'm thinking about it, the microbiome is that your microbiome is actually influenced by your social connections to people. So that if you have more social connections, you have better gut bacteria, which means that your inflammation levels are going to be lower. So we talk about socialization as one of the protective factors. So maybe that's one of the mechanisms where it happens. And it's probably just because
Fascinating. So I socialize more and my gut health improves.
Yeah. And it's probably because of cross-contamination as much as anything else.
So if I'm near other people's germs.
Yeah, exactly. Germs are not necessarily a bad thing.
So all this quarantine could have been quite bad for us.
Oh.
Okay. How interesting. And then exercise. Exercise is so relevant to just about everything. I know you do an awful lot of it. How important is it for dementia, reducing our risk of dementia?
Yeah, so I think it's hard to know which of the different elements of protection against dementia is the best, but I think exercise would definitely be up there. Exercise is good from a vascular health perspective. It's good for your sleep. It's good for your mental health, but it also seems to influence what we call neurotropins, which are sort of chemicals that preserve brain health and help with brain growth and so on. So the more you exercise, the better off your brain's going to be for it. So it really is quite important. And we generally say sort of a mix of aerobic, moderate exercise, getting yourself out of breath.
You can talk to the person but not sing to them.
Exactly.
That's that's another part of the book that I quite like. Is a simple explanation about what intense exercise is.
Yeah, and you can overdo it. You can certainly overdo it. I mean, if you're a lot of the people that are sort of long distance runners actually get sort of fibrosis of their heart, and they get pacemakers and things. So you don't have to really push yourself, but they do suggest at least 150 minutes a week of moderate exercise.
I suppose if you're a really good singer, you could be in trouble. So the other bit is also mental, staying mentally alert and giving yourself like puzzles, crosswords, Sudoku. Does this help?
Definitely.
Please don't say Sudoku.
You don't like Sudoku, are you?
No, I can't do it. It's very upsetting.
Yeah.
Why would anyone subject themselves to this?
It's peculiar. It's beyond me.
Well, unless it stops dementia, maybe then.
So the idea of complex mental activity, this is, I guess, the relevance of this question. So it's good to exercise our brains directly as well as exercise our body. And it's all about doing something that stresses our brains slightly. So not too much where it's, causes a psychological distress, but enough to make it work. And this is, so you should really forget Sudoku. So this is all to do with neuroplasticity and the fact that we know that if you do certain activities cognitively, you may reroute or grow certain circuitry in your brain, which is good for your brain health. So the idea actually with complex mental activity is you need to try and do something that's novel, so your brain is not used to it. So, you know, your psychological distress aside, you know, if you're not a regular Stokoe user, then
Don't go there.
yeah.
Fair enough. But I play chess is better.
Actually, chess, I think they've shown that chess players do have a reduced risk of dementia. I think that's true. So there you go.
Fantastic. Okay, that's good. Red wine and chess. Exercise. So you have a website, yourbraininmind.com, and there's an app coming with, or just about out?
Yes, hopefully sometime in the next few weeks. Thanks for mentioning that. Yes, it's called Brain Scan. It's a phone app, which is going to be an iPhone for the moment, but it really looks a lot at the modifiable risk factors, and it sort of tries to get an idea of individual users' risk and gives them strategies to sort of address all those things. So hoping it will be something that will help a lot of people.
Right, that is fantastic. So that's mindyourbrain.com. Sorry, I've missed the
Yourbraininmind.com.
yourbraininmind.com.
And you can go on there and you can put your email in and subscribe to it.
Games that stop you getting dementia yet, or are they coming?
Oh, maybe version 2.
Yeah,
that's constant. You know, the whole game training thing on phones is very controversial.
Oh,
and
is it?
Lumosity, who were the big company that did it, was sued because they said that they could prevent Alzheimer's. Well, no, it doesn't. You can't say that. But you know, I'm quite a fan of the brain training apps in general, and I think again, if you're using your brain, it's really not a bad
Xbox
thing.
Any good? Like Quake or Doom?
I guess if you mix it up,
Things
it's possible.
Just hopeful about certain things that could help. Yeah. Okay. So now I want to move into what happens when you're diagnosed, which is a confronting and really hard life experience. You've diagnosed people with dementia. What happens? What's it like for the individual?
So it really depends on the stage at which you're diagnosing them, of course. And I think people's reactions to being diagnosed with it can be quite different. Some people are expecting it. Some people are really quite relieved. They want to have an explanation for what's going on, and that's very helpful for them. And then once they know, they can then plan, as we were sort of talking about. But obviously there are a number of people who have difficult emotions associated with it, so grief and loss and sadness and low mood and so on. And all of those things I think are quite natural. You just need to sort of monitor them closely, and you need to make sure that they don't morph into something that's more problematic, such as sort of clinical mood disorders or clinical anxiety and so on. But I think there are lots of things you can do to try and mitigate the risk of those sort of issues arising. So ensuring that for a start, ensuring that you know everything that you can, within reason about what you're dealing with. So this is the point of the book, really.
Yes.
But also there's, websites. Dementia Australia has a great website with a lot of information. But knowing what you can about it is important. Also having lots of supports around you is really important as well. And I think it can be quite isolating sometimes, having dementia or being a carer of someone with dementia. There is a stigma associated with it, and that's an unfortunate thing.
Yes.
And so making sure you stay connected and rally support is really important as well.
So due to the prevalence of dementia, in this room, I would imagine quite a few people have loved ones or relatives or friends who have been diagnosed or may soon be. What's your advice to us, to the carer or to the relative and the friend who at the time of diagnosis?
Yeah, so I suppose it comes back to those things we were sort of mentioning. So making sure that you know everything you can. Mm-hmm. Making sure you have enough supports, make sure you monitor your own mental health if you're a carer, and that you acknowledge that it's a difficult time. All of those things are, I think, really critical. Make sure that you organise all the things you can. So some of the legal issues we were talking about before, enduring power of attorney wills. Right. So knowing that
an advanced care plan is another thing you mentioned.
Yeah. So making it clear what your wishes are, if there should there be some sort of health problem going forward, so it doesn't fall to somebody else to make that. Whether you have dementia or not, that's a good thing to have in place, actually.
Right. Yeah. Right. It is on our to-do list, actually. So once diagnosis has happened, is it all over Red Rover for you? Is it sort of the end of happiness and fun, or is there happiness and fun with dementia in life, and can it keep going?
Yeah, so I do have a chapter specifically on that, sort of the happiness side of things and meaning, because I think that is a really important part of treatment is acknowledging that those things can happen. And certainly if you catch people early in the process, they can have many years of being actually reasonably content, having good quality of life, and having meaning. You know, I mean, meaning doesn't have to be this sort of world-changing, sort of groundbreaking sort of process. It's really about just enjoying what you're doing in the moment, and you can continue to do that until quite late on in the process, I think.
Yeah, and do the sorts of preventative things we do beforehand. Does help physical activity, diet, all of that help after the diagnosis still?
Yeah,
does it make a big difference, or are we?
So again, it depends on the stage, I think.
Yeah.
I would never discourage somebody from eating healthily, obviously, or exercising safely and so on. You probably do get more bang for your buck doing it earlier, obviously, rather than later. But there is
Even when you're 48.
Even when you're 48, mate, yeah. But yeah, you can still get benefits, and certainly if you have a very early sort of forms of dementia, then exercise particularly I think has been shown to change the trajectory. So there's definitely some ability to sort of change the path to a certain extent.
Fantastic. So we've all been watching what's happened with the Royal Commission into Aged Care, and we've seen some really confronting things, and I think a lot of people do not want to go there or have their relatives go there, I mean, based on what we've seen. And it is, you know, as I look longer term for my life, it's how the hell do I avoid going in there? Are there options for someone diagnosed with dementia to not go into aged care, not to go in a nursing home, and to spend the rest of their life at home? Is that a feasible pathway? And is it getting more feasible to do that?
It's definitely feasible. I think I should make the point that, I mean, I do work in a lot of nursing homes, and I think most of them do a fantastic job.
Yes.
And I'm slightly worried about the potential for vilification of formal carers and just the demonisation of aged care facilities, which I understand where it's coming from. Some people actually flourish in nursing homes.
Yes.
And I think that's a really important point to make. You are right, though, that I think most people would like to stay at home if they can, and that's certainly achievable. I mean, if you have the means financially, then, you know, the sky's the limit, really. But if you don't have the means, which most people don't, then there is government help you can get, and there's a sort of process which is outlined in the book about how you get that, and that might just sort of involve having carers in sort of initially, perhaps providing respite for the formal care of the spouse or whatever for a few hours, and then as the dementia progresses, there may be more supports needed, but it's sort of ramped up as time goes on.
How do you help the person make the decisions about when is the right time to enter into an aged care facility?
Well, that's quite a good question. I think you just have to try and have those conversations early, so you foreshadow it, so that there's a sort of sense early on of what point that may happen later down the track. And a lot of things can influence that decision. You know, it's not just about memory loss, it's about the physical needs of the person with dementia, the capacity of the carer to cope with it. Dementia does unfortunately result in a lot of behavioural and psychological changes, which can be quite challenging for the person with dementia, but also with the carer. And all of these things can influence when perhaps placement or at least sort of respite might be required.
Have you, in your professional work, come across cases of really negative outcomes for the spouse, the kids, people around the dementia patient as well, that it's become too hard for them to manage the situation?
Yeah, definitely. And I talk about this concept of, I suppose, carer stress, and I know there's some controversy about the language around this, but at the end of the day, the way I see it, it's a difficult situation for the carer, and it's something that they have to cope with, and it can be quite confronting for them. And often we talk about the carers being sort of the invisible second patient, in fact, because they often do have quite high levels of psychological morbidity. They have anxiety or depression themselves because of the difficulties they have coping. So certainly, I think that's a really relevant part of assessing somebody with dementia, is looking at the care as well. Again, there is a section in the book that talks about how to cope in that respect.
There is. So looking towards the future of science and technology and what we're capable of, are you optimistic that we're going to increasingly be able to tackle dementia, maybe a cure? Is it possible that we are heading in that direction and that our children might start to live in a world with less or no dementia?
Possibly. I think, you know, I love tech.
Yep.
And I think it could be our saviour. I'm not
Right.
sure. It probably depends, you know, whether we're the masters or the slaves. You know, I mean, at the moment we're sort of on the edge where I think we are driven by our iPhones, for instance, rather than they have control over us rather than us having control over them. So there's a problem in that regard in terms of cognitive function.
And sleep is one of the things you're meant to do to not get dementia.
Yeah, and as actually the other interesting element of technology is GPS. Like the use of GPS is widespread, but it's really not very good for our brains. It's actually much better for our brains to sort of try and orientate ourselves in real life. I mean, our brains are designed to kind of know where things are, and there's a sort of intimate link between memory formation and
so
that
when
orientation.
we hop in the car and we just plug in where we're going and just follow it, we're actually going to increase our chance of getting dementia.
Well, theoretically, yeah.
So we should, because I often do disagree with the device, go my own way.
Yeah.
And that's actually a good thing to do, Kat, because we could, both of us won't get to, it might lead to arguments that cause dementia. But for me, it's good. Yeah.
I think that's probably right. I think we should be using the Refidex again, but I haven't personally done it, but
Refidex, that's a word I haven't heard for a long time.
I never heard of it before I came to this country. But.
Are there advances in any field of health science or medical science that are taking us towards the prospect of a cure? Or is that too strong a word, cure? I mean,
well, I think it's realistic.
Naive.
No, I think it's realistic, and I think we should be optimistic that we will have some cure at some stage. I think the problem really has been that there's been this pretty singular focus on a certain type of problem in Alzheimer's disease, for instance, over the last 30, 40 years, and all the drugs have been targeting that, possibly erroneously. And so we've now sort of shifting focus, and I think if we're now looking at other driving forces like inflammation, then if we can find ways to sort of effectively sort that out before Alzheimer's proteins develop, then that actually could be really helpful and could be curative in a sense.
So there was a Tasmanian scientist won the Nobel Prize for treating the end of telomeres, the DNA, was able to reverse the aging process, telomerase, in mice. Unfortunately, the mice all got cancer and died of that instead. So it wasn't exactly a fix to getting old, but I remember around some of the discussions there, we were looking at the possibility of keeping the human body alive and functioning with organ replacements and 3D printing of organs. But the thing we could never fix was the brain and dementia and what's the point of having a healthy body with the brain in decay? But this is sort of my hope, is that people like yourself are going to find a solution to that too.
Well, as I say, I really hope that we can eventually.
Right.
I think we're probably a little way off
but which focuses us towards the prevention.
Yeah, absolutely.
For a while.
And that's the thing that I'm most optimistic about at the moment.
So, I mean, so how much difference for the people in the room here, the people on Zoom? I think this is the big thing for how much difference do we make by really focusing on dementia?
Well,
I mean, on prevention too.
Yes. Well, when the book was written, the statistic was that about a third of cases could be prevented globally of dementia. Since then, it's been revised, and they now say about 40%. So it's sort of going up. And so the Lancet, which is a sort of medical journal in the UK, commissioned a whole bunch of experts to look at this, and there's a whole bunch of different factors which can, if they're put in place early enough, can be preventative. So I mean, that's amazing, really. Almost half of the cases, and as Madonna was saying, there's an awful lot of people, obviously globally, 50 million people, likely to treble in the next few decades.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of people to stop getting dementia.
So with those sorts of numbers, it's almost worth learning Sudoku, isn't it? 40% reduction. That's a big take home, I think, for the audience about how much difference of fibre, sleep. Would you be able to rank or prioritise these things? Like, obviously, drinking red wine's the most important.
Yeah, of course. Sudoku right down there.
In between, how would you rank them?
I think ranking's quite difficult, to be honest, because it's a very individual thing. I mean, if you have vascular risk factors, for instance, you're much more likely to focus on that as an effective prevention strategy versus somebody that has other vulnerabilities. But the sort of pillars of mental health in general, so exercise, diet, and sleep, are particularly important, I think, and using your brain is really important.
See, I think sleep is something that so many people are not getting, and I think actually screens and phones and the way we live is taking it away from us, and it's such a powerful thing for mental health and probably dementia.
I think that's right. I mean, I haven't slept for 40 years, I would say.
You work so hard.
Jen would probably disagree with that. But so I do get a bit obsessive about sleep, which of course is a vicious cycle and a terrible way, because you just don't sleep because you worry about not sleeping. And
I used to sleep BC before kids.
Yeah.
So we are coming towards the end. I think the time is running up, but I want to sort of get a bit philosophical and reflect on the pathway of a human life and this horrible sort of thing of aging. There's cancer, there's dementia, is there a good pathway that you can paint for us through this journey that we're all on?
Well, I think there's a fairly, you're right, fairly pessimistic narrative around aging at this point. That's very true. But I think the more that we tackle these particular issues, whether it is dementia or whether it's some other chronic health condition, then that's going to start changing people's perception. But it's a cultural thing. And I think in this society, in Western societies, we're more guilty of that, in certain societies where if you're older, you're more respected, more valued, and so on. You often have a better longer lifespan anyway. But the narrative is quite different, and it just has a different feel about it. So we sort of need to change our attitude towards it at the same time as looking at interventions that might shift issues with diseases and so on.
Yes, fantastic, Kai. I think that takes us towards the end. Is there anything else you'd like to leave the audience with before we open up to questions?
I think just to mention that you should certainly feel as though there are things that you can do to change the situation. So whether you're trying to prevent deterioration in brain health when you're actually healthy anyway, or if you have dementia or you know somebody that has dementia, there are lots of things you can do. And we haven't really talked about it a huge amount, but the what we call behavioural psychological symptoms, there's lots of things you can do about that in the context of dementia. So read the book, see your doctor, get assessed, and just get it looked at, because there's lots of things that can be done.
Yeah, look, it is a fantastic, well-written, easy to understand book that, the chances of improving your chances of 40% not getting dementia, have a read of the book to learn about prevention, and then for those who are confronted with it, learn how to manage it. But thank you, Kai, for writing this book for all of us. And I think now we go to Q&A.
We do. Thank you. So thank you very much for it. Yeah. So before we go to the Q&A, maybe if we can just, if you want to do your acknowledgements first, and then we'll go to questions.
So yes, I just wanted to say a few thank yous before we sort of open it up to the audience, because obviously, although I wrote the book, there's been a lot of people behind it coming to be published, and I can't obviously acknowledge everyone, unfortunately, just because of time restraints, plus memory, probably. But I did want to mention a few people. So first and foremost, I just wanted to mention Jen, my wife, who's been a star really, and has kind of just managed the Roberts household, which was close to possibly falling apart when I was writing the book, but she sort of held the fort and has really been very helpful. And also since the publication of the book has sort of gone into sort of marketing mode, and has been really great at sort of spreading the word about the book. And thanks, Jen, I love you. It's been great. So I just wanted to mention my kids, if they're still here. I don't know, you there, guys? Yeah, that's right. Just for you're so much fun to be around, guys, and puts a lot of things in perspective. So thank you very much. I also wanted to acknowledge that there are lots of links in the chain, obviously, to publication. And so I wanted to mention a few people, including Roger there at the back. Thank you very much. And Madonna King and Mario Panisi, who I don't think are able to make it tonight. And Madonna, thank you very much for taking a punt on this and appreciating the value of the book on dementia. I really appreciate it. And since the publication process sort of has been happening, there's been a lot of other people involved. So Julian Welch, who won't be here, but maybe on Zoom perhaps, did a fantastic job of editing things. Margot, thank you very much for finishing off the editing process. Sally, thank you very much for giving us an indication about what on earth social media is about. That's very helpful. Jean, who's been fantastic at marketing things as well. So there's been a lot of people involved. I hope I've covered everybody. Other family members, thank you for all your support. There's a couple of people that have been prolific Facebook posters, Pauline Swanson and Rosie Hewitt. Thank you very much to you as well. Yeah, I think that's about it. And I'm sorry if I've forgotten anyone.
Thank you. So we've already had about 75 questions on the Zoom group, so we're not going to ask all of them. So do have your question if you're in the room. Do have a question ready, because I'll just start you off with a question from Sarah from Zoom, who asks if dementia is hereditary.
Yeah, that's a good question. So it depends again on a few things. So early onset dementia, which we define as being below the age of 65, is more hereditary, more genetically mediated, it seems. As you get older, there is still a genetic influence, and I think the statistics suggest that if you have a first-degree relative with the condition, you have possibly a sort of 30% increased chance of developing Alzheimer's disease specifically. So there is a hereditary nature to it. But again, that heredity is perhaps sometimes eclipsed if you can do really good things with lifestyle intervention. So that's important to note.
That's great. And I'll go to someone from the room. Yes, what was your question?
Just a question about the dietary thing. So for a lot of other areas, like development or vitamins or whatever, it's better to get it actually from a balanced diet rather than supplements. Is it the same with dementia, or are there any supplements that are, studied and proven to actually make a difference?
I'll just repeat that for the Zoom audience. So the question is about dietary versus supplements. Is it always better to get it from your diet, the vitamins, or are there supplements that are proven to help?
I would say yes, it's always better to get it from your diet if you can. And there might be cases where you have a particular fairly severe deficiency in something, and then it would be appropriate for you to be prescribed a supplement, for instance. Very low vitamin B levels, for instance, might require something like that. But I think it's always better to get it from dietary means. There is a difference between those things. That's what we were designed to, that's the way we designed to kind of use these nutrients. Some of the supplements, the problem with them is that they're just used in isolation, and there's some synergy between different antioxidants and different supplements and vitamins and so on. And so if you're just getting them, one of them in a pill form, it may not be that helpful. So definitely diet is better.
Yeah. A question from online now. So there's a question from Betsy. Is dementia more common now than it was in the past? Because it seems to be.
It's more common in the sense that there's more people with it simply because we're aging more. So that's, if we look at the two big unmodifiable risk factors for dementia, it is age and genetics. So the fact that we are aging as a population means that inevitably there's more people with dementia.
Question, Grant?
Yeah, my father's got Parkinson's. He's 80 this year. His mother, my grandmother, died from it. I was diagnosed ADHD last year, which I'm medicated for. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what's am I doomed, basically?
Well, I definitely wouldn't say doomed. Sorry.
Oh, so the question's about having genetic people in your family with particular, Parkinson's and having ADHD, and whether this means that you are also going to develop things like, I suppose, dementia.
So it's difficult to comment, of course, specifically on your case without knowing all the details. But not everybody with Parkinson's, not everybody with Parkinson's in the family gets Parkinson's themselves, and not everybody with Parkinson's will get dementia. I mean, it is an increased risk, but it's not an inevitable part of things. There are, again, medications that can be quite helpful for Parkinson's disease, dementia, and so on. So I definitely wouldn't feel nihilistic about it, and I would continue to do all the things that we're recommending in terms of the interventions.
We've got a lovely question here from an online person who, Helen, has asked, what would you suggest as your top 5 strategies to put in place to create more joy in the life of people living with dementia?
Oh, well, that's a good question, isn't it?
It's lovely, isn't it? I hope that's in the book.
Well, yeah, probably not the top 5 exactly, but I mean, I think happiness and meaning, I mean, the top one thing, really, if I can start with that, would really be having a sense of connection to other people. So that, to me, is the most important thing. And when I've seen people with or without dementia who are elderly, the happiest ones seem to be the ones that have these close connections to other people. They don't overcomplicate life. They just have loving family, lots of friends, and so on. So social connection just is so important for that kind of sense of meaning and purpose. There are other things such as feeling safe, and then just feeling that your sort of needs are met sort of on a general level, the absence of pain and really debilitating sort of physical health problems as well. that's not really the top 5, is it? But
it's a good start, I
Okay,
reckon,
so-
and it's a really good question to think about the bringing joy to the lives of people with dementia as well. Anyone from the audience now, from the physical audience? Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering, there's lots of exciting things that you see on YouTube clips with music and memories being stimulated by music. Is there anything useful to be gained from that, or is there anything that we can do to use that?
The question is about music and whether music will be something that's, I suppose, preventative and stimulating for people with dementia. There's a question similar online as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure I know too much about that, though I would say that music, again, you know, coming back to that sort of meaning and contentment and things, can be awfully helpful for people. And I think the musical memory is somehow separated from the other kinds of memories. And I've seen sort of this chap a few years ago who was a retired concert pianist who was had advanced dementia, could hardly talk. You set him in front of a piano and he could play, you know, Rachmaninoff or something. So it was just incredible. So there is this compartmentalization of different kind of memory functions, I suppose. Whether we can use music as a kind of therapy to prevent dementia, I'm really not sure. There might be research on that, but again, it's stimulating the brain, perhaps in an unusual way. Playing music is a good thing to be doing for your brain, I'm sure. Yeah.
So one more question from online. We have Sarah says that if you have fairly advanced dementia, do you still know you have it, or has your reality, new reality, now replaced the old reality for you?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can really answer that. I mean, I think one of the difficulties with people in advanced stages of dementia is that they usually have an impaired ability to communicate what's going on internally. So there are some people that, you know, do have quite advanced dementia that have this unusual capacity to communicate these things. And I think they would certainly say that that sense of self and who you are is still preserved on some level. But the challenge is really knowing what's actually going on for most people in those more advanced stages.
Is there research being done to kind of broach that communication issue with people in late stage dementia? Is there any kind of, I know there's a lot of communication work being done with people who have communication issues as young people, you know, using other forms of communication. Is any of that work being done?
Well, we know that there are different strategies that you can use that don't just involve the use of language to sort of convey meaning and so on. So I think there is a lot of research out there. Certainly, I talk about a speech therapist from the UK in the book who provides a lot of useful advice about how to communicate with somebody in those sort of more advanced stages. And some of it might just be about gesture rather than voice, or changing the tone of your voice, or using touch or certain words to kind of encourage people in that respect. Yeah.
Great. Any other questions from the room? No, none from the room. I've got another question here from Zoom before we wrap up and go to the signing. The question is, my parents, from Wendy, my parents are 75 years old and happy just to stay home and not go on outings. If this happens, do you think that these are steps towards dementia? And, you know, should you be encouraging parents who want to stay at home to get out more and do new things? I think this might be, maybe we've
Sounds like a wasp's nest.
it might be stirring the hornet's nest.
Look, I think if it's something that people they're not used to doing that, and it's a change, then that's a concern of some kind. You know, they've always been rather like that, and they're sort of happy, you know, aside from perhaps that reduced social kind of connection. I'm not sure I'd be overly concerned about it, but can't really comment on that specific situation.
And there's plenty of stimulus you can find within the home, as we've known from a year of lockdown. There's plenty to be done to stimulate your brain from inside.
Yes.
It's true. Look, it's been an absolute delight listening to the both of you talk. And this book sounds like an incredibly important addition to books that are out there on this. So thank you very much to you, QP, for taking this chance on this book. And I think it's going to pay off very royally for everybody concerned. I see the need for this book, and I think that there's going to be a massive uptake. So do tell your friends about it. If you are having conversations with people who are concerned about these issues, do make sure that they know that this book is out there and that there's a resource for them. That is not something that's going to completely depress them. It's something that's actually going to give them hope for the future.
Absolutely.
I think that's really important. So thank you very much. And can we please have a round of applause for Kailas and Stefan? Now, just before you guys get up, and thank you to the Zoom audience, we're going to make this back into a bookshop space. So I'm going to say goodbye to everybody on Zoom now. But for people in the real physical shop, we're going to make this back into a bit of a bookshop. So the book is for sale at the table, and we're going to put this table for signing right down the front of the shop. So that's where we're going to move the signing table. And to make that happen, when you stand up, if you're on a collapsible chair, if you collapse it and lean it against the wall, our staff will come in and sweep them away. To make this more pleasant for you, we have Fiona on the bar here.